Okay, it started. Okay, can I welcome you to the Cabinet meeting of the 25th of January. It's 2 o'clock and I will start the meeting. As usual, you know, it's a remote meeting, but I'll start with apologies for absence and looking around me. No, I think everybody's here. The next item on the agenda is minutes and the minutes of the previous meeting. Can I have authority for acceptance, please? Do I have all acceptance?
Formally second, Leader.
Thank you very much. The next item is to receive any declarations of interest that they may have in terms of each and every one of us. I have none to declare. Okay, before I go into the meeting, what I will do is, as I normally do, is to remind the populace that we're still in the middle of a pandemic. There seems to be now more and more variations of the COVID-19 virus out and about. It's still with us. Please take the precautions. Now, I know everybody is talking about things like vaccines and what have you, and let's be assured they are being given out. That everybody should have had a letter signed by myself and the Chief Executive of the Health Board. You will be contacted by your GP in terms of the priority groups, and the priority groups have been mentioned before. Just to reassure people, there is testing and vaccination going on, I should say, and so far, as to yesterday, there were 41,790 vaccinations in Cardiff and Vale, UHB area. Yesterday, there were 1,528 vaccinations carried out. And that includes care homes where 2,209 care home staff and 1,373 care home residents. And in terms of 80s and over, currently 7,570 have been vaccinated out of the 41,790 as of yesterday. So they will be rolled out, and please be assured you will be called by your GP. However, there's one thing you could say is if you have changed your telephone number or you think your GP does not have your up-to-date information, tell them, just to make sure that they've got the right details. But things will be done. But even if you have the first vaccine, please be aware you still have to take the safety precautions. I will say no more. Okay, I'll go now to the references. We have some references that developing of climate change action plan. The first from Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee of the 18th of November. It talked about the reference from Cabinet when we had information. Cabinet of the 2nd of November referred a report. It was proposed to continue to engage and consult on the subject of climate change. We made the point that in terms of consultation, no idea was too small and no suggestion was too ambitious for consideration, and we will consider them all. There were some questions in terms of the committee itself. There was a member commented about resource planning. Would they be significant, and would we have to change our major infrastructure work? And the head of service indicated that this reserve didn't reflect the total amount because we have a reserve set aside. But remember, this is part of our normal everyday duties. Another one asked about the future development plans, querying the buying or on a regional basis and the work for network for transport committees and what plans and businesses in the community. And again, we're doing things like the electric bikes. And the scheme will be rolled out eventually. Councillor King, who was there, made a comment that the bike was a trial basis, but it will be brought back for further reports in the future. So that's one way forward. There were various strings of activity going on. The deputy leader was there. Made the point. She stated that although some of the projects may appear small, I think it's an important comment. To be honest, their impact may indeed be great. Referring to an example in some schools of the growing of fruit trees, which he stated could lead to have a greater impact than they had originally been planned or thought through. So basically, their recommendations from on corporate performance and resources were that they referred those comments back to Cabinet. I think all the comments that were made in there were reassuring comments, and we can move forward with the current plan. So in terms of the this reference, I'm suggesting that we thank the Scrutiny Committee for their comments, and we note them, but clearly they will be going forward in our current plan. Working on from that in terms of the next item, which is again a reference to from the Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee, indeed developing the Climate Change Action Plan. There were some comments about how much carbon dioxide was given off by individuals and and people, and there was some comment about it was thought that the impact of human activities could be challenged, but there was things like methane gas, heavy chemicals and plastics were more damaging to the environment, and he was disappointed that there wasn't more being done to tackle these things, but clearly that will form part of it. But we have to look at what we are currently doing. There's another issue in terms of of the rural communities and whether we need to look at people's leisure activities to see whether or not the congestion of cars in things like rural lanes is impeding those activities. And indeed, if we did reduce the amount of traffic, then clearly it would help those people who wish to exercise in some country lanes. There was another issue in relation to specific focus on community groups, and indeed the head of business and transformation advised that linking to specific group was something that was to be progressed, and the consultation was to allow open-ended responses. So indeed anybody can come forward in terms of that. So the views of the members were referred to Cabinet, and as I said, there was an emphasis that should also be placed on pollutant harmful to the environment rather than carbon dioxide. I think personally they go hand in hand. And then for active travel, there should be more focus on leisure users in the country lanes by reducing the amount of traffic congestion. Well, that's clearly something which we hope would be the situation, but we can't force people not to use cars, particularly in those lanes. But clearly, if there was less traffic, then it would become a little safer than it currently is. So let's be honest, it is safe in terms of everybody using those lanes properly. There was also comments in terms of improvement of public transport, where we needed to reduce traffic congestion. There was an issue in terms of Welsh Government should be lobbied for more road public transport infrastructure improvements, and indeed I think we do that on a regular basis and carry out various bids in terms of all sorts of development. And in fact, you know, we've recently done some more, and we will be doing more. And then finally, the development organ departments need to look at their practices in order to have greater regard to the council's environmental objectives. But to be honest, as far as I'm concerned, that is the purpose of our climate change strategy anyway. So in terms, I don't know if anybody wants to make any comments in terms of those two areas of comments from scrutiny. I try and take them together, it's probably easier. But in terms of what I consider to be the reasonable way forward is to note those comments, but actually thank them for their comments, but that those areas are already seriously being considered within the plans anyway. I don't know if anybody wants to make any comment, please. Nope.
Yeah, leader. Sorry, I don't know if you can see my hand up.
Sorry, I was on a different thing. I can see it now. Sorry.
I was just going to echo some of your thoughts. I think it's really positive how the scrutiny committees have engaged with it, and I think that we can all acknowledge things need to be done. And I think, as we say, we don't know the full impact of a lot of these steps. So I'm really excited to see how our overall strategy develops. And all the efforts we can do on this. So yeah, happy to second noting this as well. But absolutely, it's echoing a lot of what we're already saying. But I think we're doing this in partnership with everybody, and that's the only way it's going to succeed.
Absolutely, and I welcome comments from scrutiny, because if there's something we're missing, we need to know. Les. you want to come in?
It's okay. Ben's just said everything I was going to, so that's fine.
Okay, in that case, I'll move on. Thank you very much. We agreed that. We note it. In terms of our next item is item 5, which is the initial revenue budget proposals and the medium-term financial plan for 2021 to 23-24. That went to Corporate Performance Scrutiny Committee after it had been to other committees too. The normal round of comments in terms of the homes and safe communities. The ongoing value of importance of domestic abuse assessment and referral community safety services when looking at cost pressures in the revenue budget were highlighted. In other words, basically they're saying they are cost pressure which we hope that we can take on and accept as a reasonable cost pressure. In terms of the Environment and Regeneration Committee, again, they considered the concerns of the Environmental Committee regarding the lateness of the budget settlement from Welsh Government. So it would be better considered in January. Perhaps I can make a comment here to that. The lateness is probably out of our hands, and in many respects out of the hands of the Welsh Government too, in the basis that the UK Treasury announcement came in very late again this year. As you know, we had to go forward with an initial budget based on some scenarios, some of which have now changed. Is therefore an intention of myself and Cabinet that we will bring another report back to Cabinet shortly, which we will then refer back to Corporate Performance and Resources as the major committee before bringing it to any comments that they want to make, because clearly things have changed. We do know what our settlement was. We're informed that maybe there will be no pay rises, but I don't know about that, to be honest. But there are some issues that we have to address. We have obviously looked at the cost pressures and the savings, and clearly we're going to have to look to see whether or not we can't meet all the cost pressures, and whether or not we need to meet more savings. And that's something which we will be working on. It will be reported back to Cabinet. It will go to the Scrutiny Committee. It will then come back to Cabinet for any consideration that's given at Scrutiny Committee, and then on to Council for final ratification and the setting of council tax, as is the normal process. The next item, so the recommended from Cabinet in terms of that is that the Homes and Safe the Homes and Safe and Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee's reports be considered. One of the things they did also recommend is that the Scrutiny Committee, and if they're doing it, that's up to them, write to the Welsh Government Minister highlighting the concerns of the lateness of the budget. As I said, they haven't asked us to do it. If they wish to do it as a Scrutiny Committee, then that's for them. But clearly we're at where we are because everything was delayed. So we could do no more when we carried out our initial revenue budget was to have some estimates and some guesstimates in terms of where we were. As I said, we will be coming back and relooking at it again and giving Scrutiny another option, but obviously the main committee before we finalise at full council in March. I don't know if anybody has any comments to make in relation to the references before you.
Thank you, Leader. I'd only make a comment of, obviously we're going to be discussing this fully again in Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny, so we'll reserve comments for that, but happy to second this report. Okay,
so we note them for the time being, but also note the fact that there will be another report coming here and going to Scrutiny Committee as well. Okay, thank you for that. Item 6 is again a reference, this time from the Audit Committee in relation to the Wales Audit Office Waste Management Review. Interesting point here is that overall it was regarded that the report findings were generally positive and concluded that some of the findings were that the council was following national guidelines on household waste management, although they did make a comment because it's audit and they will always make a but or an although somewhere. Although the development of an overall strategy would enable its waste management service to reflect wider social, economic and environmental goals. 2, that the council had significantly improved its recycling performance, again, but would need to address the financial risks and pressures of the services as part of the planning forward, something I think which we are we're only too well aware of, bearing in mind that recycling has to be passed on, and sometimes the markets are very fluctuating. The third one is the council had engaged with the residents while making changes to its recycling service, but needed to consider a more structured and documented approach involving the diversity of the population. In fairness, I think, I'm not sure that's a fair comment, bearing in mind the success that we had in terms of Barry, particularly after learning the lessons of the Vale Glamorgan. And yes, you can always learn lessons. And yes, we may have to take some further tweaks in when we move forward to recycling in Penarth. In terms of the report itself, it identified 4 proposals which are listed in the report itself. There were some queries in relation to various issues which are there. One of them was that we consider an EIA, an Quality Impact Assessment, in relation to significant service changes. And the thing to highlight there, I think, is the fact that we actually did have one for the whole of the rollout, but I think it's been suggested by audit that you need one for each one. Fair point, I guess. So the matter has been referred to us. There are masses of comments in here, and I don't know if you want me to go through them or not, but to be honest, I think at this stage all we need to do in terms of this is that the key findings arising from the Wales Audit Office are going to be reviewed, and in fact those arrangements are in Appendix A, and the Council's response to review or to the review of the Wales Audit Office are in Appendix B, and that basically they've been noted. I think our officers should be congratulated on the work we've done, bearing in mind that the Vale Glamorgan was one of only 3 councils which had hit the 75% recycling rate, something which is not easy to achieve. There were comments about, and I think we're in the areas where we will have issues in terms of flats, but we always knew that. There were comments in terms of the Climate Council's climate emergency policy, and I think they take that on board, because I think that's one of the reasons why we are recycling, is in order to try and reduce the amount of wastage, and in fact looking at the climate change. In terms of other environmental issues, there were talks, as I talked about, the environmental impact assessments. As a comment, the head of finance added the report and referred to the committee. It would be monitored as well by the Waste Project Board and the Insight Board. And what's nice to know is that the auditor for Wales, Mr. Veal, then wished to reinforce the comments made by the head of finance, stating that it was good to have seen the report first considered by scrutiny and then referred to audit committee to provide an overall assurance. And indeed, if you go further than that, it's been come to us as well as a cabinet. To be perfectly frank, I am happy with the way that the waste management review has been carried out. I'm happy with the way that we carried out our service, and I hope we can go from strength to strength. I don't think anybody wants to make any comment, but at this stage, I think we should note the comments that that Appendix B is shows the proposals for improvement. I don't know if anybody else got any comments in relation to that.
Leader, may I please?
Hands, no hands. I can't see a hand. There's somebody's hands. Peter, I can't see your face, but I can see your hand.
Yeah, Leader, if I can, I think obviously it falls within my service area, and I would say that, wouldn't I? But when you open the Audit Commission's report, on the contents page, there are 4 sentences. I would love to read just 2 very short ones. The council has significantly improved its recycling performance, but will need to address the financial risks and pressures of the service as part of its forward planning. Well, I reckon that's a pretty good, powerful endorsement. And then it's followed up by the council has engaged with residents while making changes to its recycling service, but needs to consider a more structured and documented approach. And I think, well, all right, that's a fair criticism, but reiterating what you said a moment ago, the rollout in Barry demonstrated how much we had learnt from the rollout in the rural Vale, and I am absolutely chuffed to Billio with the efforts of the service area.
Absolutely. I think it's an amazing thing to do, and let's not forget we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we've done it, and our officers have come and shown how good they can be and how good they are. So I am happy, but as I said, colleagues in audit won't like it, but they always come up with an all their own but. And I accept that, because you can always do better. Nobody's ever going to, don't care what you do, anybody who thinks they're going to be 100% at everything, then they're misleading themselves. You can always improve by what you do. Anyway, I'm going to move that the report be noted, and the fact that Appendix A is also noted as our progression forward in relation to the report itself.
And formally second, Leader.
Thank you very much. The next item is item 7, which is the Shared Regulatory Services Joint Committee. It's reports of meetings. I know that Eddie is a member of that committee, and the report is before you. Any comments in relation to this, Eddie?
Yep, thank you, Leader. When you get documents like this in our agenda, it doesn't give the full picture of what's actually happened in the meeting and some of the far-reaching consequences of the decisions. I'd like to go through a couple of points, and I'll try not to be too long. Key one was the starter one was the pay award for the senior officers who's been dealing with across the 3 authorities, Bridgend, the Vale, and Cardiff, dealing with all the issues that we've got under the COVID measures. And when we read through the report, some of the activities that the shared regulatory services do, it just shows how much the commitment there is from the officers and the range of work that they deal with. So I was pleased that went through. The budget, there's been a small increase in the budget this year. I would say it's 122,000, but when you consider the budget across the region is 8.33 million, that's a small price to pay. And you consider some of the works that they're doing, then that really is credit to them for what they're doing. When you look at the performance, the officers have had to deal with all the regulatory changes that have been going into business, even during the COVID measures when people think, oh, we've closed down. The officers are the ones dealing with the front facing. And in spite of that, they've still kept us safe. And, some people don't think that that's what they need to be reminded of. But certainly they've been at the front line, to the point where, on some occasions where people haven't wanted to hear the message, we've had to have the police. So thankfully there's a joint team now with the police that they can go out and start off with, educating people on what the requirements are, and then obviously go into enforcement when they don't comply. As you're aware, the staff have been redeployed to focus on the COVID measures, and that's been a key element. Another part of the report was the Port Health Plan. It looks at Cardiff Bay and the airport and makes sure that the imports and things that are happening in those 2 areas, that we've got those safety measures and public health at the forefront. And probably more interesting to the general public, because it gives some details of some court decisions made. Some of the things that are happening, even during the COVID, during the pandemic, you still got taxi firms that are not compliant, still got road builders, got counterfeiting, and you've got scams going. And the SRS have been dealing with those sort of things, and really making sure that those people who are affected, cause those issues, have been brought to account. So I know this report doesn't sort of give the flavour of that, so I would direct people to go to the actual report and see all the detail behind this, and also the SRS website, and to appreciate the work that's been done by the SRS team. So I ask that you note the report. Thank you.
You're muted, Neil.
Sorry, Neil.
I am sorry. I've got to do it once, haven't you? Yeah, I'd echo the point, and bearing in mind the fact that these teams are also doing our test, trace and protect service in terms of the COVID-19. And on top of that, everybody's been uptight about things like enforcement, and they're the guys who are doing that as well. So you've got to remember that they're carrying out their day job and the things in the pandemic as well. Liz, you want to come in? Sorry.
Thanks, Leader. I just wanted to say, I mean, we talk about them from a regulatory perspective, and for a lot of people, that suggests purely enforcement. But I think that what's happened as well during the pandemic is that they've been such an amazing source of advice, particularly to a lot of businesses. So they don't just go out and with a rod of iron telling businesses off and putting them enforcement notices or closure notices. They actually provide a huge amount of supportive advice to help businesses sort out their operations so that they're dealing with people safely, and all that information is also on the website. So for me, from an economic development perspective, it's really handy to be able to signpost businesses to that website so that they can see exactly what they should or shouldn't be doing. And I know that a lot of businesses in the Vale have found that really, really helpful. And personally, I've always been amazed at how supportive and how helpful they've been whenever I've got in touch with them to get some information for local businesses to find out what they should be doing in a given circumstance. So big thank you from me.
Indeed, I agree, because some of the things that has happened in terms of the COVID there's lots of guidance, but there's also regulations. So some things that can be enforceable, some that are just simply guidance, and it is a bit of a minefield, and they are there to help out, and they do. So I agree. Okay, so we will note the current minutes in terms of that. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Good. Next item is the minutes of the corporate parenting panel, which is a part 1 report because there's a part 2 later. And I know that Ben is the chairman of that, and Catherine's on it too. So any comment from you, please? And
Eddie's on it as well. It was really. It was a really wide-ranging, meeting, and really useful to get into the detail of some issues affecting our children looked after. We're required to put together quarterly returns to Welsh Government now, as there's still this expectation that we reduce the number of children looked after, and the panel really appreciated the detail that the officers went into in understanding that. So in the part 1 report, a lot of that is there, and the part 2 report refers to personal details that we don't want to share, obviously, publicly. There was also a presentation from our housing department on all the work they're doing with vulnerable people that was really useful, as well as understanding how we're helping those access apprenticeship routes and supporting them into work. So it was a very positive meeting, and I think it's important to talk about positive meetings at the moment, and all that the council is doing to work with our community of children looked after. Every council acknowledges there are a large number of children looked after, and COVID has had an effect on that, and to look at that from the perspective of the child who is looked after, it was a really useful meeting. So if there's no other comment, I see Liz has got her hand up. That's a facial reaction of putting the hand down. So I'd move and note the minutes. Thank you.
Okay, and we'll pick up the other part in part 2.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I agree. Next item. Thank you for that. Apologies to Eddie. Next item is a reports proper. First one is the use of the the managing director's emergency powers. I need to put my teeth in today. They are for noting, but there are things in there which are quite important to note. For example, the childcare offer capital grants program, the emergency bed and breakfast accommodation for the homeless, the COVID-19 non-domestic rates restriction for the business fund, This is really important. The deed of variation to the leisure contract as part of the surrender of the release of Homeview Leisure Centre in order for it to become a mass vaccination centre, which should come online. I understand, if not before, by the 8th of February. Also payments of self-isolation payments, and indeed, not forgetting the 21st Century Schools programme, the decarbonisation funding. Thought I need to get my teeth together. So basically they're for noting, but I think they're important things that have been done under delegation of the Managing Director. So agreed? Yeah.
Informally second.
Thank you. The next item is moving on from where we were in terms of scrutiny, in terms of the Vale Public Service Board's Climate Emergency Charter. The PSB has developed a climate charter, which is in Appendix A. Sets out a number of commitments, recognising the partners have different roles and responsibilities. I think that's important to emphasise. We're in this together, but everybody had different things to do. The chart has been led by the Council and Natural Resources Wales, with important discussion from other partners, obviously. The charter sets out clear collective statements of the intent from all partners. The commitment of the charter is grouped under 3 headings: lead by example, take positive action and reduce our impact, and each organisation will progress work in appropriate ways for that particular organisation, but clearly with the support of other partners. The commitment of the charter are consistent with the work already underway in development within the council, and it's the intention of the charter will be launched at the PSB Public Service Body meeting on the 5th of February 2021. There are clearly some setting up objectives that are in there. The objectives are priority projected of taking climate change, priority project the Move More Eat Well programme, and organising learning is improving engagement, and the Pathfinder project is time banking and volunteering in particular. There's some of the 4 themes that are going forward. There are 16 commitments, and together they provide a consistent approach across the PSB to the climate change. Some examples are buy less and buy local. Some things like make our buildings more energy and water efficient, and obviously reduce the amount of waste, and that's just some of them. As I said, the charter is to be launched on the 5th of February. What we're asking recommendations is the Cabinet agrees to the Council's sign up to the PSB Climate Emergency Charter and works with the PSB and other partners to tackle climate change. I think that goes hand in hand with what we've done in the past and the resolution that we've made in the past. That pursuant to the recommendation 1 above, I sign the leader signs the charter at the forthcoming PSB meeting on February 2021 on behalf of the Council, and that the Cabinet agreed that the Climate Emergency Charter is incorporated into the Council's response to the climate emergency and the Developing Climate Change Action Plan. What I'm also going to do, and I would may seek clarification from the monitoring officer, because I've just thought about it, is that we do so under using delegated powers 1414, so that we can in fact go to the meeting on the 5th of February and sign it, because if this is called in, and it could be, then we have the power to actually sign it anyway. I don't know if the monitoring officer is, because I've just thought about it right now. I know it's been to scrutiny committees, but just as a flavour that we make sure that I can actually go to that meeting and sign it.
Yes, I think it's a very good point. I think following the meeting, I'd asked my colleague Matt Swindle to obtain confirmation from the chair of the relevant scrutiny committee that he's in agreement with that.
I think it's probably easier because it's like only 2 weeks away. Okay, so with that slight amendment, I'm sorry about the amendment, but I just thought about it as I was talking about it. Do we any comments to make in relation to it? Liz.
Thank you, Leader. I just thought it's worth pointing out this chimes really well with the references we had earlier when with our climate change or climate emergency strategy, we talked about the need to work not only to get our own house in order, but to work with other organisations. And this is an absolute perfect example of how we will be working with other public sector organisations in the Vale of Glamorgan to make sure that our actions have a much greater impact across the board. So I think this is really good news, and happy to second.
Good, because bearing in mind that I know there are 4 statutory partners in the Public Service Board, but we took on board and encompassed a lot more, and some of whom are the youth cabinet and the youth forums that we've had, and indeed we had a meeting with them as far as the PSB were concerned, and this was one of the major issues that they wish to take forward. So I'm happy for that. So everybody's in agreement? Yes. Yep. Thank you. The next item is the Vale Public Services Board, the procurement of digital customer experience platform, CRM replacement. Basically, the report sets out the reasons why we need to purchase and procure a new digital customer experience platform, and the key functionality required to meet the needs of our residents and the objectives of the council. The report excludes budgetary because it's a part 1 report, there's a part 2 report later. It excludes budgetary and other procurement details as they're considered later, as I said, and they're commercially sensitive. The support for the council's current customer relation management system ends in December 2021. So the current version of Oracle will no longer be supportive or maintained after that time. The other modules of the Oracle ERP system are to be upgraded to the new Oracle Cloud version in the coming year. It was also agreed that separate exercise would be undertaken regarding the CRM to assess solutions available, whilst also remaining an option as part of the upgrade to the cloud version. The existing customer relation management system is aging, as I said, and has been significantly and has a significant impediment, it isn't at the moment, they will have, to achieve the objectives of the digital strategy and meeting the increased requirement to interact with the council online. The new platform is a key element to achieving those goals. So in light of the circumstances, the council is required to engage in a procurement exercise to ensure that a replacement is implemented in order to avoid disruption to the services. So basically, that is the backbone of it all, and the Cabinet is asked to consider the proposals set out in this as part 1 of the report that actually then deal with the other nitty-gritty in part 2 of the report, which comes later in the agenda. I've given a background to the reason the system is currently outdated. It isn't fit for purpose, or it won't be in the near future, and we need to replace it. Eddie.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, one of the key elements, this is exciting, isn't it? It's going to improve accessibility for residents of the Vale to and businesses to get in contact with the council. But also, it's noted in the report that it's not a be all and end all, and there is recognition that what this will do is that it'll provide capacity for staff to deal with the human interactions when required. So, you know, it's not going to replace everything, but we just know that modern day we can do transactions, we can pay bills and everything online without having to deal with people, and that sort of transaction stuff will be a saving. But when we've got queries that we need answers to, then we'll still have C1V to deal with those. So I'm really excited that this is moving forward.
Good, thank you. In that case, can we agree that and move forward and then pick up the rest in part 2? Yep, thank you very much.
Formally second.
Thank you. The next item is a timetable of the meetings in May 2021 to 22. And basically this is to consider the draft timetable for the period May 2021 to May 2022. And the recommendation is that the timetable of meetings for May 2021 to May 22 are set out in the Appendix A, but I'm going to amend it as amended in a minute, because as with anything, things change even between the time you print the things and they become public. Subject to, but also we would approve it subject to further changes in arrangements for meetings deemed appropriate by the Mayor of the Council and the relevant scrutiny committee chairs. Basically, there are some changes. They are before you, but I'm going to move the following amendments, and that is that the audit committee, the date changed due to a typographical error. it's amended to the 21st of July 21st of July 2021 to the 21st of June 2021. In terms of the Planning Committee, date changes to avoid potential overlap at the end of the Planning Committee meetings on these dates and start times of Scrutiny Committee Corporate Performance and Resources for January, February and March is that a new date, it would be January the 26th, a new date would be February the 23rd, a new date would be March the 23rd. The dates for Planning Committee are as currently laid out in the draft table for the 15th of December and the 13th of April 2022 are to remain unchanged to avoid the Christmas and Easter periods. The Planning Committee matters indicated above have been discussed with the Chairman of the Committee and the Operational Manager for Planning and Building, and they both agreed to these amendments. So can I not simply move the recommendation as it is that I will move the set out in Appendix A as amended, as I just mentioned. But clearly, if there are other changes, that can happen during the course of the year too. Okay?
Yeah, and second, Leader.
Thank you. Right, next item is the review of statues, monuments, street names and building names, and a review panel terms of reference. Summary of the report sets out the draft terms of reference for the review panel to assist in the review of statues, monuments, street names and building names in Vale Glamorgan in light of the Black Lives Matter movement as previously requested by Cabinet in November 2020. The panel will be established and it will review the representations received and will be made up of elected members and external experts. The recommendations of the panel would be reported to the Cabinet for consideration in due course. The recommendations I'm going to go through first is that one, that is recommended the Cabinet notes the contents of this report. Two, it is recommended the Cabinet endorses the terms of reference for the review panel as described in this report and at Appendix A. That three, it is recommended that this report is referred to Scrutiny Committee, Learning and Culture for consideration and to provide a further update on the work of the review. As you know, in November 2020, Cabinet approved proposals to establish a review, and that to be undertaken both from an historic perspective to ascertain any causes for concern, but also inviting consideration for future recognition of individuals or events that celebrate diversity. The previous report sought approval to undertake the review and to engage our communities in this important area. The review will be undertaken by a panel and Cabinet requested that the terms of reference for the panel be developed and reported for consideration and approval prior to the panel being convened, and that's the reason for it here today. The report sets out the terms of reference and seeks approval of the same. In terms of the terms of reference, the sets out the panel, the purpose and role, the membership of the panel, including is laid out later, but it also has the ability to include the ability for the leader of the council to supplement this membership as appropriate, which I think is important for you to understand. The accountability is how the panel will make recommendations to Cabinet and the involvement of the Scrutiny Committee, Learning and Culture. Its working methods is to the approach to engagement with town and community councils and the community more widely, how the panel will undertake their business, and the meetings, the frequency and the format will take place. The review, as I said, is indicating an initial review of the operation of the panel in Cabinet by June 2021. So it's recommended that we endorse this. It goes to the Scrutiny Committee, but also since the report was considered by Cabinet, a copy of that report has been sent already to town and community councils. A further reminder will be sent to those organisations to submit any views to inform the panel's work, in addition to inviting any views from the wider community via the council's social media channels. And what I'm asking is that actually any views or comments come in by the end of January, if possible, because what we do intend to do is to try and have the first meeting of the panel in February. In terms of the membership, the intended membership is myself, or leader as the chair, the deputy leader of the council, the member who has a quality champion portfolio, the member who has the LGBT champion portfolio, and officers from the council strategic leadership team, one representative from the Vale Glamorgan Stand Up to Racism, and I understand we've already received a nomination, and one representative from local history societies. And I guess that may fluctuate, but it depends on them. If they want to come together as history societies locally and choose a representative, fine. Otherwise, we will move forward. In addition, as I say, additional attendees at the panel will be agreed by myself or the chair. For example, in inviting representatives of those making representations, or to provide the panel with specialist knowledge or advice. As I say, it talks about accountability, it talks about the working methods, and it talks about the meetings. As I said, we hope to have the first one in February. A meeting of the panel will also be convened in March, and there will be a review at the end of June 2021. So if anybody wants to make any comments in relation to this, please. I see Liz, go down, please.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I think that it's a very useful thing to sort of to make clear that this is an advisory panel.
Yes.
And this is about listening to our towns and communities as to what they think the correct way forward is. I know a lot of people have voiced concerns over the huge inconvenience and cost that would be involved in the change of street names, and this is not some draconian measure to change the face of our towns. It's more about finding what is the correct solution for those towns and communities as guided by those towns and communities. So very much look forward to working with them. As I said, this is not a yes/no answer. It's not a simple binary decision. So look forward to working with our towns and communities to find solutions to how they feel their community should be reflected, and also to making sure that the people who currently aren't represented within our communities are so in the future.
Indeed, I think it's not a case of looking back, it's also a case of looking forward. I think that's important. And the other thing is, of course, that as I say, it'll be dealt with by a scrutiny committee, but I know it's also been dealt with, and it will be considered, I think, next week by the Community Liaison Committee, which is where town and community councils come together. It is something which we want to take a broad brush approach. Anybody who have interest or otherwise, then please come forward. But we really do need somebody to do that by the end of January, if possible, early February at the latest, because we want to hold a meeting in February. It hasn't been decided on a date yet, because clearly we need to get this report through first. And again, in terms of this is going to the Scrutiny Committee, Learning and Culture for their consideration. So if they've got any comments to make, then we can consider those at another time if necessary. Ben, you want to come in? Ben.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I think, and adding to, I completely support what Liz has described, and I just want to reassure everybody, myself, and I know the rest of the Cabinet, remain open-minded about what is the best way forwards for communities, and actually, until we have an understanding of what communities want to happen and they're part of that conversation, then nothing, no changes can happen. This has to be done in partnership. This is about understanding how members of our society who feel that they have, that they are affected by what they see on the streets and in other parts of the towns and other parts of the country, in their towns and communities, and we just want to understand if there are instances like that. So I think this panel is a very useful mechanism for beginning to pull those things together, identifying those things, and like I say, I remain open-minded. I know I don't want to speak for everyone else, but I know we all are as to where we go forward with this, and this is about working with the community. So thank you for all the work putting together this panel.
Okay, good. It's positive note, and obviously we'll come back to this at another time, and hopefully be able to convene a meeting at sometime in February, dependent in some respects on how much information comes forward from us other groups. Because if nothing comes forward, then there's nothing to meet on. But I assume there will be. Okay, is that agreed? It is good. The next item is Bromley Park Tennis Court refurbishment. And Cabinet Member for Leisure, Arts and Culture, Catherine, please.
Thank you, Leader. Are you ready for this report today? So I'm seeking Cabinet approval today to accept a grant from Tennis Wales and Sport Wales to assist in refurbishing the tennis courts in Bromley Park. And after that, enter into a partnership agreement with them for Tennis Wales to manage the facility when it's complete. As you're aware, Bromley Park is one of our green flag parks, and the tennis courts in there are in a state of disrepair. Tennis Wales are the governing body for tennis in Wales, as the name suggests, and they've offered us a grant of £45,000 to assist in refurbishing the courts, provided that we match it as a council. In addition to this, we've got funding of £30,000 from a new Sport Wales Recovery Fund. The shortfall in funding this scheme, and 50% of projected costs, will be funded by projected underspend for the replacement floor in Barry Leisure Centre. Are you still with me? Following completion of this work, the site will be managed and maintained by Tennis Wales via a 7-year lease. And this enables us to make the best use of that facility there for Barry Community Tennis Club, the Vale Tennis Academy, and our own sports development team. It's also worth bearing in mind there are other tennis courts available in and around the area. As the tennis court is classed as a public open space, we have a legal requirement to advertise this loss of public open space. And the process, obviously, is the consideration of any comments and objections, should any be raised, which would have to come back to Cabinet at a later date if objections are received. Should no objections be received, the lease process will progress as the report recommendations suggest, along with the commitment for funding from us. So we do have 4 recommendations in front of us. I'm happy to read them out if you'd like to, but I'm equally convinced that you've all read them already. It's just in relation to obviously who has delegation control for this, but I ask Cabinet's approval for this, please.
Indeed, the only one I would highlight is number 3, and that gives authority delegation to the monitoring officer, head of legal and democratic services, to advertise the disposal of the land formerly the court by way of lease in accordance with Section 123 of the Local Government Act 1972, with any comments being reported back to Cabinet for further consideration.
Yeah.
I think it's important that we just highlight that, that's all.
Yeah, and that is really important, yeah, because if there are objections, then we will consider them, but it's the only way that we can put it all together to get this in place for all of our residents.
No, that's fine, that's fine. If we can move forward and we can upgrade them, and recognised body can run it on our behalf on a lease basis, then that's fine by me.
Thank you.
Okay, is that agreed? Yeah, good. Looks
Thanks
like
very
it is.
much. Thank you.
No problem. The next item is Landmice Flooding Alleviation Scheme, which update Cabinet on the progress, and the Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood Services and Transport, Eddie, is bringing this report. No, yeah, oh, it isn't. It's Peter King. I apologise.
Sorry, thank you for that, Leader. Will comment, but
I was thinking of Eddie because it was in Landmice.
That's right.
I think my cabinet colleague will probably want to comment, but he's not actually on the hook at the moment. Can I just start by saying the creation of a comprehensive flood risk management scheme for the village of Clonmice is a priority for the council's flood risk management agenda. However, the development of a suitable flood model to ensure that as many houses as possible are protected by the scheme is, as I'm sure we all appreciate, extremely technical and complex. Unfortunately, the coronavirus pandemic has significantly impacted upon the progression of this and other schemes during 2020. However, I am pleased to note that works were undertaken during September 2020, and land negotiators have now been appointed to seek to acquire the land necessary to progress the scheme. So that sort of brings us to where we are with this report. There are 4 quite important recommendations. I would say that the 2 most significant, well, probably all 2, 3, and 4 all significant. First of all, that delegated authority is granted to the Director of Environment and Housing in consultation with me as Cabinet Member and the Head of Finance to submit applications for and to accept the grant funding necessary for this project from Welsh Government. the delegated authority is granted to the Director of Environment and Housing in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood Services and Transport, again me, to seek any permissions that may be required in the pursuance of the construction project, and that subject to the internal capital bid for 15% match funding of the total estimated scheme costs of £1,349,000 being accepted, the capital programme for this.
Try million.
I guess it's a lot easier if I say 1.349 million. Well, it's the way the written report's written with K's. I agree with you, but there we go. Anyway, 1.349k for the scheme be amended accordingly. So I ask for that. Thank you.
Okay, and without changing somebody's portfolio, without telling them, I'm terribly sorry. I'll go over to Eddie because I know that this is an issue which has been rolling on for some time, but it is a commitment, and there are issues in terms of land ownership which we need to address, and this is the reason for this report today. Really, Eddie, do you want to come in, please?
Yeah, thanks, Leader, and thank you, Peter, for that. It's clear that it's taken some time, and there've been some considerable changes to design or whatever, and I do appreciate that particularly over the last few months there's been engagement the board members, and I do understand that there's a further meeting with local community council who've been affected. It's that communication piece that's probably going to assist this. I recognise that it is a new design, it's remodelled. I'm not an expert on flooding, but I do recognise that there are individuals that do have that expertise. And with this plan that it's been remodelled, I'm reasonably confident that that should be ironed out. But recognising also that there are concerns from local residents in that we're talking about land ownership and the like. And I know as a cabinet we understand that, but the officers have done as much as they can, and they're moving forward with it. So I support that we're progressing with this scheme, because the previous schemes that have been done in the area, I'll note Boverton, for example, have been successful. So, the last flooding a week or so ago was a concern, but thankfully we didn't have as much as other areas had. So, but we recognise that concern can be alleviated by this. So, thank you for that.
And it also echoes the point of other things that we've talked about today in terms of the environment, in terms of climate change, etc. And it is, you are right in that this would give an attenuation pond area or attenuation to the flooding, which is what's happened in other areas and could have been done in other areas too, which would alleviate some of the floods that we've recently seen. Maybe not to the extent of the ones that we had in Mid Wales, but clearly this is now becoming a regular occurrence, as we saw last year in Rhondda and Taff particularly, and now this year in terms of Mid Wales. So you're moving the recommendations. Eddie seconded them. I'm happy to move forward. Is that agreed? Yep. Good. Thank you. The next item is another item to agree continuation of sustainable transport planning contributions for the Green Links Community Transport Service until March 2023. And again, this is over to the Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood Services and Transport, Peter.
Thanks again, Leader. I think Green Links, as we know, is a demand responsive transport service. It's been operating for some 10 years, over which it's been both successful and very much appreciated. I think in the last full year there were over 11,000 passengers who benefited and were grateful for the service. However, last year, March last year saw the changes due to coronavirus, and the service was substantially outsourced to help deliver services, including important things like delivery of PPE. Mm-hmm. We tried reinstating the service in a limited format in September, and whatever happens in the foreseeable future will be guided very much by Welsh Government's guidelines. But going back to its funding, since 2014 it's been funded from Section 106 Sustainable Transport Contributions, And that brings me nicely to the recommendations. I'm recommending that the Green Links Community Transport Service continues to be funded by Section 106 Sustainable Transport Contributions until the 31st of March 2023, and that the contributions highlighted in Appendix D are used to fund this service during financial years 2021 to 22 and 2023 to 22 to 23.
Yeah, that's fair enough. It's been a very successful service, and indeed we've used it for different purposes during COVID, but we still need to retain it. I'm happy to second. If anybody has any comments, if not, no, I don't think there's any comments. In that case, we agree that yes. Yep. Thank you. The next item is item 17, which is the bus emergency scheme. Request for the council to sign up to the BES2 scheme. Again, Peter, please.
Yes, again, Leader, thanks ever so much. And no one will be surprised to learn that all sorts of companies have faced major difficulties due to coronavirus. And this is a development of an earlier scheme, this one called number 2, to try and help preserve the public services, bus services, so that when we eventually come out of things, they are there and viable enough to return and restore transport. So I'm asking that the Cabinet agrees to the principles in the BES2 agreement as contained in Appendix 2 of the report, and then that delegated power is granted to the Head of Neighbourhood Services and Transport in consultation with the Monitoring Officer, Head of Legal and Democratic Services, and me as Cabinet member to negotiate and agree any further amendments to the agreements that may be required during the following Cabinet approval. And then subject to the recommendations 2 and 4, that Cabinet authorises Monmouthshire County Council to execute the BES2 agreement on behalf of the Vale of Glamorgan Council, and that Cabinet supports a call through the lead authority, Monmouthshire County Council, for a further report on bus reform proposals from Welsh Government relating to the future management of the bus services in Wales.
Okay, is there any comments in relation to that, please? I can't see my screen at the moment. I'm terribly sorry.
No.
No. Okay, good.
Thank you.
I'll formally second, if you like.
Yes, please.
And thank you.
Okay. Next item is item. Thank you very much. Sorry, I lost the screen. And I was looking for something else. Item 18. Any items that I have decided are urgent? I have none. However, we do have some under part 2, which are urgent business. We have, as I said, corporate parenting panel and the procurement of the digital customer experience platform as a replacement. They will be under part 2 of the agenda, which is a report of the cabinet members. As these are matters that are considered commercially sensitive, etc., as mentioned earlier on, we will need to move into a private session where confidential matters can be discussed under part 2. Therefore, myself and my cabinet members will ensure that the recording is closed at this point, and will ensure that any relevant parties remain to hear the details of the item to be discussed. Following the meeting, the outcome of the part 2 discussions will be formally captured as part of the minutes of the meeting, advising all the parties of the final decisions of the cabinet of this particular cabinet outcome. So it's a bit formal, but we do have to go into part 2. So I am going to formally close the public part of this meeting now and reconvene later in camera under part 2. So I will be closing this meeting now. So thank you for your attendance. Thank everybody else for their attendance, and I look forward to seeing you in a second or two. That is the cabinet members, of course.